All right. Yesterday we read week 5 about the American Indians. Okay? It started out talking about Mesa Verde. Does anybody in here remember what Indian tribe was at Mesa Verde? Anasazi, very good. And what was special about them? Kellen?
They lived in these holes in the desert which streams came through their city. They knew a lot of things better than the people now. Or they were what was the word? But they knew a lot of stuff. They knew how to.
They were a high functioning society. Yeah. But what we were looking for was where they had their houses.
Yeah.
They were cliff dwellers, okay? Which meant that there was a plateau, and they had a cliff built in the side of it. And that's where their houses were. Which meant that the only way that they could get attacked was from the front. They couldn't get attacked from behind, they couldn't get attacked from above because they were back under. And so they could only get attacked from one side. They were cliff dwellers, and that was the Anasazi, okay? They disappeared, we don't know where they went. They had 3 different theories, but they can't really prove any of them. Then we went on to the inside. And on the inside, they talked about two different Indian nations. One was the Maya and the Aztec. Where were the Maya and the Aztec?
Mexico.
Mexico. They were down south of the border. They were in Mexico. And one thing that they did was some mound building and building of temples. Okay? They were a high functioning society also, and they also had calendars, and they went by a 20 number line with the number 20, which was very sophisticated for that time period. They are also into astrology, which helped them with the calendars. Okay? Then we moved up to America, the United States. We talked about the Southwest Indians. And the Indians that we talked about there were the Zuni, the Navajo, and the Hopi. Okay? They also talked some about the Anasazi because they lived there. Most of their houses were built with adobe, which meant that they were built with bricks that were made from mud. In the Southwest, it's more of a desert, and so what each of these Indian tribes is going to do is build their houses, build things from what is there. Okay, they can't, it's not like today where, oh, I want some Italian tile in my house, I'm going to get it ordered from Italy and have it brought in. No, they had to build from what they had. And in the desert, there's not a whole lot of trees. And so trees weren't the big thing. What they did was they made most of it out of this adobe, which is like building it out of bricks. But the bricks are just made from mud. They dry the mud, and it becomes hard like a brick. Okay? It talks about the different crops that they had. And the Navajo, they had these circular houses that were called hogans. One thing about these hogans, you're going to learn about this later, is that the hogans were dug into the ground a little bit. And if you have a dog at home, you'll find where the dog will dig a hole and then lay in it. The reason it does that is because when it digs that out, what's the ground like underneath? It's cool. And so what they did was the Navajo, they figured this out, they dug out, and so the ground inside of their house was, you would step down to get into it, but it was cooler, and it cooled the houses down in there. Then we had the Great Basin. The Great Basin takes up between the Rockies and basically most of the way, all the way over to the Pacific Ocean. And it's an area that down in there, they're talking about a basin. And this is where a lot of Nevada, Idaho, parts of California, Oregon, some of Colorado is in there. And the tribes that they had there were the Crow and the Nez Perce. These people, they would have hot summers, but they would also have extremely cold winters. Think about it, you're out there in the Rockies, it can be cold. And it talks about the different foods that they had. Then we move on to the Great Plains. The Great Plains, this is where the Apache, the Cheyenne, the Dakota, Arapaho, these were all out in the Great Plains. And in the Great Plains, this is where the buffalo roam. This is where there was millions of buffalo. And what these Indian tribes did was they would move along with the buffalo herds. And they would follow the buffalo. The reason why was because that was their food source. They didn't go out and kill a bunch of them. They only got what they needed for that night or the next night. They would basically, for a tribe, they would go kill one buffalo. These are huge animals. And they would kill one. Out of a million, they're not really harming anything. And they respected that because they only took what they needed and that was it. Now, with the buffalo, the heads, they would take them and use them as part of ceremonies. The bones, they would use those as jewelry. They would also use them as tools. The horns on the buffalo, they could take that and use that for storing things in it. This is kind of gross, but this is what they did. They also took the stomachs, they cleaned the stomachs out, okay? Tied off one end of it. And what they did was they used it as a storage bag, and that once it was cleaned out, once it was cleaned out, then they could put a lot of water into it, and they could move around with water. Yes, it's not like today where you go to the grocery store and get your bottle of Zephyr Hills water, but this is the way that they did things. The skins, they would take the skins and use them for clothing. They would also use them for their teepees. And they also used them as like a rug to lay on for a bed. Okay? The teepees were something that it was a bunch of sticks put up and they had the skins around it. So when they went to bed at night, they weren't out in the elements and they could sleep. All they had to do was wrap those sticks up and wrap up that stuff, the skins, and off they would go and follow the herd. They would get their next one, kill their next one, have it for dinner there. They'd set up the teepees and start all over another place. They kept moving along with the herds. Now, along streams, they would also get some fish and things. They would find wild plants that they could eat along with the buffalo meat. But this was what the Great Plains was. And this is in the middle of the United States. We talked about the basin is on the west side of the Rockies. This is on the east side of the Rockies, okay, over to the Mississippi River. The Northwest Territory, this is one that I always describe as being the rich part of town, the rich part of the United States, because the reason it's rich is because up in the Northwest, there is like a tropical rainforest up there. So there's a lot of water. You go to the Southwest, there's not much water. The Northwest had a lot of water, they had a lot of trees in the forest, there was a lot of animals. They also built fences that went through the river. They took the wood, made fences, put it through the river. What that actually did, it was like a net. It would catch the salmon. And so that's how they would catch the salmon. They also went out into the ocean, but they had so much wood that they had houses made of wood. They also had the totem poles, okay? Whereas in the Southwest, if they had any wood, they used it for their house, and they were lucky if they had any. So making a totem pole, that wasn't even an option. Northwest, they had so much of it that that's what they could do. Then you had the eastern woodlands. The eastern woodlands isn't here in Florida. It's like your northeast area up there, okay? They had a couple of Indian tribes up there that were the Algonquin and the Iroquois. And the Algonquin, you're going to find out later about them in another week. They were divided into a bunch of different tribes, is sort of the way to say it, but there was like 7 of them. And the leaders of each one of those tribes would come together and meet, and then they would go back to their tribe and do the rules. It's sort of like if you think about a small country that had 7 states, okay? Those 7 states would have a governor, and the governors would go meet, and then they'd go back to their state. Well, instead of that, they're going back to their tribes. And this was where a famous one was. And what was her name?
Pocahontas?
Pocahontas, think of Disney, okay? And she was part of that. Then we come down to the southeast. The southeast is basically Georgia, Florida, everything from the Mississippi River over to the Atlantic, okay? And it includes Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, North and South Carolina. That's basically your southeast. The Indians that were here were the Caddo, the Natchez, Cherokee, Creek, Timucua, and the Seminole. Those are the ones that they're going to talk about. They talk about the Seminole house in the reading too, where it's called a chickie, and basically what it is it's a raised platform and a roof over it. The platform is up high enough to where snakes and alligators and wild animals don't get in, because there's wild pigs that are out there too. And there were, in Florida there were, and you didn't want to get in the way of those because they could kill you. Yeah, they weren't pigs, they were boars, and they had these tusks that came out. And if they got into you, they would tear you up. So it was better to keep away from all of these. And also, when they were up that high, the mosquitoes only go up to a certain height. Doesn't say that in here, but the mosquitoes only go up to a certain height, and then above that, they're not gonna go up there. And so it makes it a little more comfortable for them to sleep. It's an open area. It wasn't a closed, like a teepee or the Hogan or the longhouses that they had. It was an open area. As Florida, I mean, it never really gets all that cold here. So they didn't have to worry about that. They talked also about the middens. These were the shell piles that were left over. This was their trash, is basically what it was, but their trash isn't like ours. Ours, we have plastic bottles, we got paper this, we got plastic forks and stuff. Got leftover food and everything else. Them, all that they had were shells and broken pottery. And that was their mound. And I told you, if you went to Philippi Park, there's an Indian mound. Basically, that's a midden. that's there. And if you took an x-ray machine and looked through, you would see nothing but shells and broken pottery in there. They talked about the names and the names of the different sports teams, and how they are trying to change them. Some have changed, some have permission so that they don't have to change it, and that, and then we go on to Bacon's Rebellion. This was taking place in Virginia, and Bacon basically didn't pay attention to Governor Berkeley, and since he didn't pay attention to him, he went ahead and ended up killing a bunch of innocent Indians, not the bad Indians, but the good ones. He didn't know which ones. Came back, and then he took over the town from Berkeley, and then Berkeley went to go to take it back, and Bacon burned down the town. King Charles said, "That's enough over there, I need someone in charge that can take control."
Is Bacon considered the bad guy?
In this, Bacon was. He was told by his leader to not do anything, to not go and kill these Indians. And there were Indian attacks, but he went and attacked Indians that didn't do the attacking, that were friendly. And that disrupted the whole Indian nation then. Because some of the Indians were friendly with trying to live with the pilgrims that were there. And then there were others that were upset because they're taking their land. It's like me coming and saying, "Oh, I'm gonna live in your backyard."
No.
And yeah, and you would be upset. But the thing is, the Indians were feeling that. They were feeling upset because all these pilgrims were coming in and saying, "Hey, time to move. We're taking over this land." So he ended up not paying attention to to the leader. And then when the leader decided to say that that was treason because he was going against him, then Bacon decided, all right, instead of going to jail, I'm gonna take over the town. And he took over the town. Then when Berkeley went to take it back from him, that's when Bacon's men burned it down. Bacon ended up catching some disease or something and dying. And Berkeley ended up hanging some of these people that took over the town. And then the king said, "That's enough," and sent somebody over to take over. But this was a brief going over of what this lesson is about. I know that your test is going to include knowing which Indian tribes, and the worksheet that you're gonna work on today is going to tell you which Indian tribes go to which area. Like the Seminoles, for example, they are in the southeast. You wouldn't want to put them in the northwest or put them in the southwest. They're in the southeast. The ones that had teepees, those were in what area? The Great Plains, okay? You need to know which tribes were in which area, what their houses were like, and what their food was like, what they ate, okay? And that's a lot of what you need to know for this.